Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. The HOA president thought she owned every inch of this neighborhood, but she forgot to check the one document that mattered. My deed. Let me back up and explain how I ended up becoming the guy who single-handedly ruined the most expensive social event this community had seen in years. I live on what you might call a unique corner lot in a semi-private development that was built back in the late 80s. When I bought this place 5 years ago, the real estate agent kept mentioning something about a spite strip, but honestly, I thought she was just using some weird industry jargon. Turns out, spite strip is exactly what it sounds like. The original developer, apparently having some kind of beef with the county over road easements, decided to keep a narrow piece of land for himself rather than deed it over to the HOA like the rest of the common areas. This spite strip runs along my property line. It's about 15 feet wide and 80 feet long, completely paved, and looks for all the world like it should be a public turnout or maybe overflow parking for the development. But here's the thing that makes this whole story possible. It's 100% private property. My private property. The developer sold it to the previous owner, who sold it to me, and I have all the paperwork to prove it. Now, I'm what you might call a document HOArter. I have a color-coded binder system for property surveys, tax maps, deed records, and, yes, even records of previous legal wins I've had with various bureaucracies over the years. My wife used to joke that I was paranoid, but after what happened with our last HOA dispute 3 years ago involving tree trimming, she's learned to appreciate my obsessive record-keeping. The trouble started on a Saturday morning in early June. I was looking forward to sleeping in, maybe getting some yard work done, when I was jolted awake by the sound of a power drill coming from right outside my bedroom window. I stumbled to the window and couldn't believe what I was seeing. There was a maintenance guy in an official-looking uniform drilling holes directly into my fence posts. Not near them, into them. And he wasn't alone. Another worker was down on the pavement with a can of white paint, carefully drawing parking space lines across the paved area of my spite strip. I threw on a bathrobe and headed outside to see what was going on. "Morning," I called out to the guy with the drill. "Mind if I ask what you're doing there?" He looked up from bolting a bright green sign to my fence post. The sign read, "Official HOA Guest Parking," in bold white letters. "Just following orders from the board president," he said, getting back to work. "She told us this was common ground now and needed to be marked properly for the big event tonight." I blinked a few times, trying to process this. "I'm sorry, did you say common ground?" "Yeah, community property. The lady said they needed extra parking for some fancy party and this area wasn't being used for anything anyway." The painter looked up from his work. "We're supposed to get 12 spaces marked out here, plus the fire lane striping. Should look real professional when we're done." I felt that familiar tingle you get when you know someone has made a very expensive mistake, but you're not sure yet just how expensive it's going to be for them. "Are you sure this is common ground?" I asked, keeping my voice level and friendly. "This is a permanent installation you're doing here." The drill operator scoffed. "Look, buddy, I don't make the decisions. I just follow the work orders. If you got a problem with it, take it up with the board." "Fair enough," I said. "Just wanted to make sure you were certain about this." I went back inside and started a pot of coffee. Then I called my wife, who was visiting her sister for the weekend. "Honey, remember that spite strip documentation I keep in the blue binder? The one you made me help you organize last year? What about it? I think I'm about to need it." By the time I'd finished my coffee and gotten properly dressed, the maintenance crew had completed their work. 12 neatly painted parking spaces stretched across my property, each one marked with crisp white lines. The signs bolted to my fence were official-looking enough that I had to admit if I didn't know better, I'd probably think this was legitimate HOA parking too. I spent the rest of the morning reviewing my documentation and making some phone calls. By noon, I had a plan. The annual summer gala was the biggest social event in our development. The board president, who I'll just call president, had been planning this thing for months. It was being held at her house, which sat directly across the street from my corner lot, and apparently she'd been bragging to everyone about how elegant and sophisticated it was going to be. Professional catering, a jazz quartet, the works. Around 4 in the afternoon, cars started arriving. At first, people parked in the president's driveway and along the regular street parking. But as more guests arrived, I watched from my front window as President herself came outside and started directing traffic. "The VIP parking is right over there," I heard her telling people, pointing directly at my spite strip. "Board members and our special guests should park there to keep the fire lane clear." I watched as a parade of expensive cars pulled into my newly marked parking spaces. The board secretary's luxury sedan, the treasurer's massive SUV, the vice president's sports car. Each one carefully positioned within the crisp white lines that had been painted on my property that morning. That's when I decided it was time for a neighborly conversation. I walked across the street to where President was greeting guests at her front door. She was dressed up for the occasion, clearly in her element as the hostess of the community's premier social event. "Hey there," I said, giving her my best friendly neighbor smile. "Great turnout for your event." "Oh, thank you, we're so excited. This is going to be the most successful gala we've ever had. Listen, I just wanted to give you a quick heads up about those cars parked over there," I said, gesturing toward my property. "That strip of land isn't actually HOA property. You might want to move those cars before there's any kind of problem." President's smile faltered for just a second, then returned full force. "Oh, don't be such a buzzkill. The community needs this space for the event's success. It's not like you're using it for anything anyway." "I understand you need the space," I said, still keeping things friendly. "But the thing is, it's private property, and I just wanted to make sure everyone knew that before—" "Look," President interrupted, her voice taking on that particular tone that HOA board members use when they want to sound official. "I don't know what you think you're trying to pull here, but this is for the good of the community. If you continue to interfere with tonight's event, I'll have to consider writing you up for neighborly interference. The board takes community spirit very seriously." I nodded thoughtfully. "I appreciate you letting me know your position on this. I just wanted to make sure we were all on the same page." "Good. I'm glad we understand each other." I walked back to my house and made a phone call to a local towing company that I'd researched earlier. Interestingly enough, they had a history with our HOA. Not a good history. "Yeah, I remember those people," the dispatcher told me when I mentioned which development I lived in. "They tried to get us in trouble with the city last year for some bogus complaint about our lot. What can we do for you?" "Well, I've got some unauthorized vehicles on my private property that need to be removed. Multiple vehicles. I was hoping we could work out some kind of bulk rate." "How many vehicles are we talking about?" I looked out my window and counted. "Looks like about 8 or 9 right now, but there might be more coming." "Oh, we can definitely help you out. Our trucks are available tonight if you need them." "Perfect. Let me send you the documentation that proves it's private property, and then I'll call you when I'm ready." Next, I set up my video camera on a tripod in my front window. If this was going to get legal later, I wanted documentation of everything. I filmed the HOA signs that had been bolted to my fence, the painted parking spaces, and each car as it parked on my property. Then I sat down at my computer and composed what I thought was a very reasonable email. The subject line read, "Unauthorized vehicles on private property, immediate removal required." The body was short and to the point. I explained that multiple vehicles were currently parked on my private property without permission, included the GPS coordinates of the exact parcel, and requested that all vehicles be removed within 30 minutes to avoid towing at the owner's expense. I attached a copy of my deed and the original developer's survey from 1988 as supporting documentation. I sent this email to every board member's official HOA address. Then I sat back and waited. Through my front window, I could see the gala was in full swing. The jazz quartet was playing, people were mingling on President's back deck, and the professional catering staff was busy serving what looked like a very elegant dinner. 35 minutes after I sent the email, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from the board secretary responding on behalf of everyone. "Stop trying to ruin our event. Community cooperation expected from all residents." I looked out at my property, where 9 cars belonging to various board members and VIP guests were still parked in the spaces that had been painted on my land without my permission. I called the towing company. "We're ready when you are," I told the dispatcher. "How many trucks do you think we'll need?" "Better send 3, just to be safe. And remember to bring all the paperwork we discussed. This needs to be completely by the book." "Understood. We'll be there in 20 minutes. I have to admit, I felt a little bit like I was planning a heist. But a completely legal heist where the people getting robbed were the ones who had actually stolen from me first. The tow trucks arrived right as the gala's main course was being served. Perfect timing. I met them at the edge of my property with my deed in hand, along with copies of all my supporting documentation. "This is definitely private property," the lead driver confirmed after reviewing my paperwork, "and these vehicles are definitely parked without permission." "That's correct. Any of them have disabled parking permits or anything like that?" "Nope. Just regular cars parked in regular spaces. Well, regular spaces that happen to be on my private property." The first car to get hooked up was the board secretary's sedan. It was a newer model, probably worth more than my annual salary. The sound of the tow chains clanking into place was surprisingly loud in the quiet evening air. That's when someone at the party noticed what was happening. "Hey, what are you doing to that car?" I looked over to see one of the gala guests standing at the edge of President's yard, pointing at the tow truck. "Private property towing," the driver called back matter-of-factly. "Unauthorized vehicles." But that's community parking. The HOA said we could park there. Not according to this deed I'm looking at, the driver replied, continuing to hook up the car. More people started to notice. I could see guests gathering near President's front window, pointing and talking animatedly. But the party was still going on, the music was still playing, and most of the board members were still inside enjoying their expensive catering. The second tow truck moved into position behind the treasurer's massive SUV. This one was even more expensive than the first car, one of those luxury models with all the fancy features. It also had a custom license plate that read Board Mem, which I thought was a nice touch. The third truck was working on the vice president's sports car when someone finally ran inside to alert the board. I watched from my front steps as President came charging out of her house, still holding a wine glass, with the rest of the board trailing behind her. "What is going on here?" she demanded, marching straight toward the lead tow truck driver. "Ma'am, we're removing unauthorized vehicles from private property. We have all the proper documentation. This is community property. This is guest parking that the HOA designated for tonight's event." The tow truck driver looked over at me. I held up my deed. "According to the property owner here, this is private land. He's got the deed to prove it." President whirled around to face me. You can't do this. We have an event going on. These are our guests' cars." "I sent you all an email 35 minutes ago asking you to move them," I said calmly. "I even included a 30-minute grace period. You're ruining our entire event. This is community sabotage." "Actually," said the police officer who had just arrived, "this appears to be a civil property dispute." Someone had called the cops, probably one of the panicked party guests. The officer had already spoken with the tow truck drivers and reviewed my documentation before approaching the crowd. "The vehicles are parked on private property without the owner's permission," the officer continued. "The towing company has proper authorization from the property owner. This is a civil matter between the property owner and the vehicle owners." "But they can't just steal our cars," the board secretary protested. "It's not theft, ma'am. It's private property towing. You can retrieve your vehicles from the impound lot. The towing company will give you all the information you need." By this point, the jazz quartet had stopped playing, and most of the gala guests were gathered in President's front yard watching the drama unfold. The professional catering staff was still inside, probably wondering if they should keep the dinner warm or start packing up. The fourth car was being loaded onto a truck when President tried a different approach. "This is harassment," she announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This resident is deliberately trying to destroy our community event out of spite." I looked around at all the faces watching me. Some looked angry, some looked confused, and a few looked like they were trying not to smile. "I'm not trying to destroy anything," I said, keeping my voice calm and reasonable. "I just don't want unauthorized vehicles parked on my private property. I think that's pretty reasonable." "Community cooperation is part of living in a neighborhood like this," President shot back. "Absolutely," I agreed. "Community cooperation is definitely important. That's probably why the community should ask before using someone's private property for parking." The fifth car was now being hooked up to a truck. This one belonged to one of the VIP guests, a friend of President's who had apparently been given a special parking spot as part of some kind of social status thing. "You know what?" President said, her voice getting higher and more strained. "Fine. We'll remember this. The board will definitely remember how cooperative you were when the community needed your help." "I'm sure you will," I said. "And I'll definitely remember how the board put up permanent signs on my fence without asking." That seemed to catch her attention. "What?" "The signs," I said, pointing to the HOA guest parking signs that were still bolted to my fence posts. "Those are bolted directly into my fence. That's property damage." For the first time since the towing had started, President looked genuinely worried instead of just angry. The sixth car was a smaller sedan that belonged to someone I didn't recognize. Probably another VIP guest. The tow truck driver was working efficiently, clearly experienced with this type of situation. "Look," President said, trying a more conciliatory approach, "maybe we can work something out here. The event is almost over anyway. Can't we just call this whole thing off?" I looked over at the 3 tow trucks that were still working, the cars that had already been loaded up and were ready to leave, and the small crowd of very well-dressed people who were watching their expensive vehicles disappear into the night. "I think we're a little past the point of calling things off," I said, "but I appreciate the offer." The 7th car was being loaded up when the board's lawyer arrived. Apparently someone had called him in a panic. He was a youngish guy in a rumpled suit who looked like he'd been pulled away from his own Saturday night plans. "What's the situation here?" he asked President. She quickly explained about the towing, the private property, and how I was supposedly trying to ruin the community event. The lawyer listened, then walked over to me. "Can I see your property documentation?" I handed him my deed and the survey map. He studied them carefully, using his phone's flashlight to read the fine print. "This is definitely private property," he said finally. "The Spite Strip was never deeded to the HOA." "But we've been treating it like community property for years," President protested. "That doesn't matter," the lawyer said quietly. "Using someone else's property doesn't give you ownership rights unless you can prove adverse possession, and that's a very high legal bar that definitely hasn't been met here." The eighth car was now being hooked up. There was still one more vehicle parked in my spaces, but it belonged to someone who had apparently left the party early without knowing their car was about to be towed. "So, what do we do?" the board secretary asked the lawyer. "Well, first you pay the impound fees to get your cars back. Then you hope he doesn't sue you for trespassing and property damage." I watched President's face go through several different expressions as she processed this information. Anger, disbelief, worry, and finally what looked like the dawning realization that this was going to be very expensive. "How much are the impound fees?" someone asked. The lead tow truck driver overheard the question. "Depends on how long the vehicles stay in the lot. But for 8 vehicles, you're looking at several $100s minimum, plus the towing fees, plus storage fees for each day." The ninth and final car was being loaded up as the lawyer pulled the board members aside for what looked like a very serious conversation. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but based on their body language, it wasn't going well. The first tow truck was ready to leave. The driver handed me a clipboard with receipts and paperwork. "All documented," he told me. "Everything's by the book. If anyone has questions, they can call the office." "Thank you," I said. "I really appreciate you guys being so professional about this." "Hey, no problem. We see this kind of thing more often than you'd think. HOAs can get pretty aggressive about claiming property that isn't theirs." As the tow trucks pulled away with their cargo of expensive cars, the remaining party guests started heading to their own vehicles. The elegant gala was effectively over. The jazz quartet was packing up their instruments, and the catering staff was beginning to clean up what looked like a very expensive dinner that had been abruptly interrupted. President was still standing in her front yard, staring at the empty parking spaces where the board's cars had been just an hour earlier. The white paint lines were still there, bright and clear in the glow of the streetlights, marking out 12 perfectly legal parking spaces on my perfectly private property. The lawyer finished his conversation with the board and walked over to me. "My clients would like to discuss resolving this situation amicably," he said. "Would you be open to some kind of settlement arrangement? What did you have in mind?" "Well, obviously, they'll pay the impound fees to get their vehicles back. And they'll pay to have your property restored to its original condition. Remove the signs, repaint over the parking lines, that sort of thing." I nodded. "That sounds reasonable. And they'd like to avoid any formal legal action if possible. They understand this was a misunderstanding about the property boundaries." I looked over at President, who was now standing with her arms crossed, staring at the ground. "I think we can probably work something out," I said, "as long as everyone understands that this is private property going forward." "Absolutely. There won't be any more confusion about the property lines." The lawyer looked relieved. "I'll have them prepare a written agreement spelling out all the terms. Should have it ready by early next week." "Sounds good." As the lawyer walked back to rejoin the board, I headed toward my front door. It had been a long evening, and I was ready to go inside and call my wife to tell her how things had gone. "Hey!" President called out behind me. "This isn't over." I turned around. "What's not over?" "You think you're so clever, don't you? You think you've won something here?" I looked at the empty parking spaces, the bolted-on signs, the paint lines on my property, and the defeated-looking group of board members standing around in their formal event attire. "I think I defended my property rights," I said. "That's really all this was ever about." "We'll see about that," President said, but her heart didn't really seem to be in the threat anymore. I went inside and made myself a sandwich. It had been a more eventful Saturday than I'd expected, but I had to admit there was something satisfying about watching a plan come together so perfectly. The real satisfaction would come later, though, because this wasn't actually over yet. The next morning, I woke up to find a new email from President in my inbox. The subject line read, "Community Standards and Neighborly Expectations." The email was long and rambling, but the basic message was clear. According to President, I had violated community standards by refusing to cooperate with the gala parking situation. She claimed that my actions had damaged community morale and set a dangerous precedent for non-cooperation among residents. The email concluded with a formal notice that I was being fined $500 for disruptive behavior harmful to community events, and another $300 for failure to maintain community standards of neighborly cooperation. I read the email twice to make sure I understood it correctly. Then I burst out laughing. This woman had just tried to fine me $800 for defending my own property rights after her board had illegally installed parking signs on my land. I forwarded the email to my wife, along with a message that said, "You're not going to believe this." She called me within 5 minutes. "Are you kidding me? She's trying to fine you after what happened last night?" "Apparently so. What are you going to do?" "Well, first I'm going to call the lawyer I've used before for HOA disputes. Then I think I'm going to have some fun with this." The lawyer I'd worked with previously was a specialist in HOA law who had helped me with the tree trimming dispute a few years back. He was expensive, but he was also very good at what he did. "Let me get this straight," he said after I'd explained the situation. "They installed permanent signage on your private property without permission, used your land for unauthorized parking, ignored your request to remove the vehicles, and now they're trying to fine you for defending your property rights?" "That's correct." "And you have documentation of all of this?" "I have video, photos, copies of all the emails, the deed, the survey, and receipts from the towing company. This is what we call a slam dunk case. They've violated so many property laws here that I barely know where to start. What do you think our next move should be? Well, we could sue them for trespassing, property damage, and abuse of process, but before we go nuclear, let me send them a letter explaining the legal situation. Sometimes that's enough to get people's attention. The lawyer's letter arrived at the HOA office by certified mail on Wednesday morning. It was a beautiful piece of legal writing that politely but firmly explained all the ways the board had violated property law over the weekend. The letter requested immediate withdrawal of the fines, payment for property damage, and a written apology for the trespassing incident. It also mentioned that failure to respond appropriately might result in formal litigation for damages. By Thursday morning, the board had called an emergency meeting. I wasn't invited to the meeting, obviously, but I heard about it through the neighborhood gossip network. Apparently, the lawyer had explained to them just how much trouble they were in, and President had spent most of the meeting screaming at the other board members about how this was somehow their fault for not checking the property boundaries properly. Friday afternoon, I received a call from the board's lawyer. "My clients would like to schedule a meeting to discuss resolution of this matter," he said. "I'm listening." "They're prepared to withdraw the fines, pay for property restoration, and cover all the impound fees from Saturday night. They'd also like to discuss a settlement payment to avoid formal litigation." "How much are we talking about?" "They're prepared to offer $5,000 in addition to covering all the costs I mentioned." I thought about it. $5,000 was nice, but it wasn't really about the money at this point. "I'll consider it," I said, "but I want a written guarantee that there won't be any retaliation for this incident." "What kind of guarantee?" "I wanted in writing that the board acknowledges this was private property all along, that they had no right to use it without permission, and that any future attempt to fine me or take action against me related to this incident will be considered harassment." "I think that can be arranged." The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening in the community center's main conference room. I showed up with my lawyer and a box full of documentation. The board showed up looking like they'd all been through a very unpleasant week. President was there, but she looked different than she had at the gala. Less confident, more defensive. The other board members looked uncomfortable, like they'd rather be anywhere else. The settlement negotiation took about 2 hours. In the end, we agreed on a payment of $7,000, plus coverage of all costs related to the incident, plus a written acknowledgement of my property rights, plus a guarantee against retaliation. The best part, though, was the formal apology that President had to read aloud during the next board meeting. It was a detailed acknowledgement of everything that had gone wrong, including the unauthorized signage, the trespassing, the improper fines, and the failure to respect property rights. I attended that board meeting, of course. So did about 30 other residents who had heard about the incident through the neighborhood grapevine. President read the apology in a flat, defeated voice while staring down at the paper the entire time. When she was done, the board secretary made a motion to accept the apology into the official meeting minutes. It passed unanimously, with President abstaining. That was the last time President served on the board. She resigned the following month, citing personal reasons and desire to focus on family. The official newsletter mentioned that she was moving to a different state for a new job opportunity. I used the settlement money to install a beautiful wrought iron fence around the entire Spite Strip. The fence has an equally beautiful gate with an electronic lock and a large, professionally made sign that reads, "Private property, not HOA land. Unauthorized use prohibited." The fence cost almost exactly $7,000 to install. Every few months, new residents move into the development and ask about the fenced-off area next to my property. I always explain that it's private land, not community property, and that it's fenced to prevent any confusion about who owns it. Most people are perfectly understanding about it. But every once in a while, someone suggests that it would be nice if I opened it up for community use, maybe for overflow parking during events or holidays. When that happens, I just smile and tell them about the time the HOA tried to turn it into guest parking for their annual summer gala. The story usually ends there. Nowadays, when I drive through the neighborhood, I sometimes see the former president working in her garden. She's still living here while she supposedly prepares for her move to that new job in another state. Every time I drive past her house, I give her a polite, neighborly wave. She always looks away and pretends not to see me, but I can tell by the way her shoulders tense up that she remembers exactly what happened that night when the HOA learned the difference between community property and private property, the hard way. And every time I pull into my driveway and see that beautiful fence protecting my spite strip, I remember the most important lesson from this whole experience. Sometimes the best way to be a good neighbor is to make sure everyone knows exactly where the property lines are, even if you have to use a tow truck to make your point. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Best Buy 2004. I had unknowingly been working with Deion Sanders' wife as a customer when I worked in the computer department at Best Buy. She would come in with their kids multiple times over a 2-week period. Best Buy would sometimes hold employee store meetings early Sunday mornings, and this particular Sunday they made it very clear that any credit debit card purchases must be accompanied by a matching ID. No exceptions. A day or two later, Pilar, Deion's wife at the time, came back in and was ready to purchase. Great. I still did not know who she was, but we got the entire shopping cart filled with everything she needed, and we had it narrowed down to 2 laptops. We just needed to wait. BC, her husband, was almost here. The laptop was for him. In this particular Best Buy, there's a clear view of the front doors from computers. A yellow Hummer rolls up and double parks, normally only done by people pulling up to load a massive appliance, etc., and in comes Deion, of whom I immediately recognized. He comes right up to me and knew my name and shook my hand. He said so. I hear you have 2 laptops, show me. He picked the one he wanted and then told me he was giving me his card and was leaving, but Pilar would handle the rest. He handed me his debit card and sure enough, Deion Sanders in all caps. Cue malicious compliance. I said, Deion, look. I know who you are, obviously. However, we have a company policy where I absolutely have to check ID with every card presented. No exceptions. The man did not have his ID on him, so I politely asked him to hold on and I needed to make a call. So I called my manager on the wireless extension phone they carry around. BBY traffic was dead at this time of day, and I could see all employees peeking over aisles and such to see Deion. Manager immediately picks up and says, "What are you doing? What's up?" "Sir, I have Deion Sanders here and he does not have his ID on him and is paying with card. I know with the Sunday meeting the other day it was made very clear, no exceptions. I was instructed to let it slide. Deion did get a kick out of it though, so I will never forget this. We laughed about it and I explained and it was a great time. I wonder if he remembers this as the time he got asked for ID to confirm his identity, or when it's ever happened before. The cool part was that Sunday on Sports Center, Best Buy's logo was front and center at the sportscaster's table, and Deion showed off his brand new 13 super thin laptop he got at Best Buy. Haha, I sold him that laptop. The next one is an entitled people story. I was flying from Portugal to London and waiting at the gate at Lisbon Airport. The flight was full and a member of airline staff left the desk to ask passengers to put their hand luggage into the hold, as there would not be enough space in the overhead lockers. This is standard practice and clearly signposted at the gate. Hand luggage is never guaranteed to stay with you. She approached an English couple sitting closest to the desk and asked to see their boarding passes. From how they dressed and spoke, I could tell they were quite wealthy, posh, West London types. The woman immediately became defensive and demanded to know why. The staff member explained that the flight was very full and that passengers with economy tickets would need to check their bags. The woman's response was instant and hostile. "Why should I have to do it? Why are you picking on me?" The staff member explained again that everyone with an economy ticket would be asked. She was simply starting early to keep boarding running smoothly. The woman reacted as though she were being persecuted, insisting she was being singled out while everyone else was being left alone. The staff member kept repeating that she had started with her only because she was sitting closest to the desk. The woman and her husband became increasingly aggressive. The staff member's face went red as she tried to explain that she was just doing her job and trying to avoid delays for everyone. She stressed that she was not picking on them. Eventually, the couple were so hostile that the staff member started to cry. She stopped asking anyone else and returned to her desk, shaken and visibly upset. Someone sitting nearby quietly explained to the woman that the staff member had not been targeting her and that everyone would be asked to check their bag anyway. The woman repeated that it was unfair because she had been asked first and that she would not accept being treated that way. It was clear that her idea of unfair was simply her being inconvenienced. When boarding began, I watched the couple closely. They were about to face the same woman they had reduced to tears. Instead, they let the person behind them step forward and then slid neatly into the premium queue to be boarded through another staff member, keeping their suitcase because premium passengers are allowed to. On the other side of the gate, they stood smiling at each other, pleased with themselves, as if they had pulled off something clever. Trying to be generous, I reasoned that they had a tight connection at the other side and didn't want to lose time waiting for their bags. Still, no excuse for being rude. Anyway, when we landed in London, I went to the baggage carousel to collect my suitcase. Surprise, surprise! Guess who was standing there, waiting like everyone else, hand luggage still in hand, waiting for their suitcases? They had made someone cry, slowed the process for everyone else, and saved nothing. No time, no effort, nothing at all. They just got the smug satisfaction of feeling the rules did not apply to them. The next one is an entitled people story. I had always hoped that the world would eventually awaken to the self-centered nature of people like Karen, but it seemed like that day would never come. Little did I know that I was about to become entangled in a gripping tale of entitled demands and escalating conflicts that would put my home, my family, and my very freedom at stake. My wife and I had recently settled into our new house after years of saving and anticipation. Expecting our first child added an extra layer of stress as we hurried to prepare the baby's room and ensure that everything was perfect. Our neighborhood was close to several colleges, making it an attractive location for students seeking off-campus housing. As such, some homeowners in the area rented out rooms to earn some additional income. However, with our family growing, we had no intention of accommodating a college kid. At first, everything went smoothly, but one day, a young man who barely looked old enough for college knocked on my door, claiming he wanted to live in my house. "Can I help you?" I asked, genuinely puzzled by his audacity. He replied, "Yeah, I go to college, and I want to live here." Surprised by his misguided assumption, I explained, "I'm sorry, but you must have the wrong house. We haven't posted any rental advertisements." Undeterred, he persisted, "This house is small, so it must be cheap enough for me." Chuckling to myself, I reiterated that we were not renting and closed the door. My wife and I shared a laugh, assuming it was some kind of prank or hazing ritual. We brushed it off, thinking it would be the end of the bizarre encounter. To my dismay, the following day brought another knock on the door during dinner time. This time, accompanying the persistent young man was a woman who embodied the very essence of a Karen. I braced myself for the inevitable annoyance. "Can I help you, ma'am?" I inquired, already aware that this encounter wouldn't be pleasant. With a demanding tone, Karen exclaimed, "Yes, my son came here yesterday and expressed interest in your property. However, you disregarded him without even listening." "I did listen to him," I replied calmly. "If he's looking for a rental, he should check online postings." Unyielding, Karen retorted, "This is unacceptable. My son will be starting college soon, and he needs a place to live." Unfazed, I responded, "Most freshmen live in dorms, and I can't offer a room for rent. That's not our problem." Indignant, Karen continued her tirade. "Dorms? I won't allow my son to endure such a horrible, cramped lifestyle like those poor kids. He deserves to live in a house, and this is the one he likes." Baffled by her outrageous demands, I reiterated, "We don't have a room for rent. I'm not sure how else I can explain this to you." Displeased with my response, Karen snapped, "A room? You clearly don't understand what we are trying to explain. You will give him the entire house. I wouldn't allow him to live with such a rude stranger. You need to move out." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Her audacity knew no bounds. In a fit of frustration, I slammed the door shut, dismissing her absurd request. However, Karen refused to leave. She persisted, incessantly knocking and shouting through the door. Witnessing my wife becoming increasingly distressed, I knew I had to take action. Concerned for my pregnant wife's well-being, I quickly ushered her into our bedroom, urging her to put on headphones and drown out the commotion. Assuring her that I would handle the situation, I prepared myself for round 2 with Karen. But as I approached the door, a cacophony of police sirens suddenly filled the air, signaling the arrival of law enforcement. To my shock, Karen wore a smug expression, as if she had already won. It turned out that she had called the police, accusing me of trespassing in my own home. Tears welled in her eyes as she spun a tale about her son being the rightful owner of the house, which had supposedly been occupied by these vile squatters, my wife and me. The police wasted no time banging on my door and preparing to arrest me, but I refused to let this injustice stand. Amid Karen's hysterical cries, I managed to interject, informing the officers that I was the rightful owner and had the necessary paperwork to prove it. Karen vehemently argued that my documents were fake, further fueling the tension. Determined to resolve the matter, the police agreed to postpone the arrest until they could review the evidence and confirm the legitimacy of my claims. Meanwhile, the attention turned toward Karen, who now raged, insisting that the officers arrest us so her son could reclaim his supposed property. However, when the police asked the son to produce his own paperwork, he could only offer a blank stare in response. He had no understanding of property deeds or possession rights. It became increasingly apparent that Karen's claims were baseless. Acknowledging that everything seemed in order, with me as the rightful owner of the house, the police shifted their focus onto Karen. They sternly reminded her that calling emergency services under false pretenses and providing misleading information about a criminal activity was against the law. Karen's anger escalated as she was informed of the consequences of her actions. "Defiant until the end," Karen shouted, threatening to sue the officers and demanding their names and badge numbers. But the police remained unperturbed, leading her away in handcuffs and depositing her in the back of their squad car. As they drove off, the chaotic atmosphere finally subsided, and my wife and I were left to revel in the ensuing peace and quiet. Months passed, and we joyfully welcomed our baby boy into the world, unburdened by further troubles. The incident with Karen had only strengthened our resolve to protect our home and family. From that day forward, we vowed to never let anyone infringe upon our happiness or lay claim to what was rightfully ours. Our house was meant to be a sanctuary, a place where our family could thrive and grow. So as I reflect upon the battle with Karen, I realize that the world is full of challenging people like her. But by standing up for ourselves and asserting our rights, we can overcome their attempts to seize what belongs to us. Our home remains secure, and our lives flourish, forever free from the demands of entitled neighbors seeking to invade our sanctuary. The next one is a pro-revenge story. My first husband was not a very nice man. For 6 years, I was belittled and basically treated as a baby factory. He was a fantastic father, but a horrible husband. After he finally got his heirs, I was treated even worse until I finally woke up and decided to leave his ass. This revenge story is not about him. I just had to set the scene. I moved out of the house, taking just my clothes, the car, worth $4K no more, and the computer. I had nothing, and stayed at a friend's place for a couple of weeks before I was able to find a crappy townhouse with roommates. I had no furniture, and my bed was a cat pee-smelling couch I was able to score. I ended up having 4 jobs, with one of them being full-time, and once a week I wouldn't even be able to sleep a night between jobs, meaning I had to stay up for almost 48 hours. Now, fast forward 1 year. My divorce was finalized, and I had fulfilled my year's lease for the townhouse. By this time, due to all my hard work, I had furnished the home, my bedroom, and my kids' room for when they would be with me for visitation. The scumbag landlord, let's call him SBL, was a somewhat nice landlord during my tenancy, and I was a good tenant, never being late with my rent. Although I had roommates, I was the sole name on the lease. SBL would show up often, with some excuse like plumbing tests or whatever, just so he could be creepy and hang around, trying to have conversations with me that had mild sexual undertones, which made me quite uneasy at times. Finally, the lease was fulfilled, and I was now on a month-to-month contract. At that time, I was ready to move out of this crappy townhouse and found a great house in the nearby mountains. I was simply thrilled now that I had my feet on the ground and could afford something a bit better than slum living. My lease stated that I had to give 1 month's notice in order to move out. Unfortunately, I was only able to secure the new house for the next month, which was just 3 weeks away. I sent an email to SBL stating that I intended to move out at the end of this month, in 3 weeks, and that he could try to find another tenant. But I did state that if he didn't find a tenant, I would still fulfill my legal obligation and pay next month's rent. Within 1 week, 2 weeks before I was set to move out, he emailed back and stated that it was very generous of me, but he had already found a new tenant for the beginning of next month, so I would be off the hook. He even tipped his hand by stating that he had already collected a deposit from them. Now, something happened a couple of days later, which was no fault of my own or my roommates. The townhouse came with its own appliances, including a washer and dryer on the main level. My roommate had put a load of laundry in and went to the living room to take a nap. He woke up to find that the washer had malfunctioned with the sensory switch, which never stopped the water fill stage, resulting in an inch of water in the kitchen and living room. He turned off the washer and called me for help. I had just finished work and rushed home to assess the damage. It was bad. There was standing water on top of the living room carpet and a good inch of water in the whole kitchen. I called SBL and informed him of the issue. By the time SBL showed up, I had already removed most of the standing water with the help of my roommate and friends who brought shop vacs. SBL didn't seem too upset, which surprised me. An appliance repairman had come to look at the washer and he confirmed the malfunction, showing how the dial would stick on the fill stage and not click over to the agitation stage. After replacing the dial and lubricating everything, he left. The next week was chaos as I was busy trying to pack, and SBL had insurance assessors and workers come in to evaluate the damage. They ended up removing the carpet and cutting out 2 feet worth of lower drywall from the whole main level. On the day of the move, even though I was supposed to be there for a couple more days, SBL let himself in while movers were moving out my stuff, and he went around taking pictures of everything. I initially thought it was for insurance claims. I felt bad for SBL and told him that I would not ask for any of my deposit back. He responded in front of the loading crew and my roommate, "Thank you, that's very generous of you." We parted ways, and I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks into my new home, SBL showed up on my doorstep with a summons to appear in arbitration because he was suing me. What? On what grounds? He claimed it was all in the paperwork he handed me, an 18-page manila envelope with detailed charges, including photos. Now I knew why he had taken pictures. He was nickel and diming me on everything from a bent Venetian blind, that was already like that when I moved in, to scuffs on walls and more. He even wanted me to pay his insurance deductible and the following month's rent. He claimed that the tenants he had lined up backed out at the last minute, stating that they didn't think the place would be ready in time with the new drywall and paint, so he still wanted me to pay that month's rent. Really? Duck. This. Crap. I knew I had been more than generous by letting him keep my entire deposit, and now he wanted to sue me for thousands? He was not only claiming the damages caused by the flood, but also improvements he needed to make that should never have been my responsibility in the first place. He even included cracks in the living room wall that resulted from the building settling. How was I responsible for that? He was accusing me of negligence, and I wasn't going to stand for it. I knew it was a slummy townhouse complex, and most of his tenants were on welfare. Maybe he could get away with this with others, but not with me. No way! I had just gotten out of a marriage that made me feel insignificant and destroyed my self-esteem. But now, I had my dignity back and felt strong for the first time in a long time. I wasn't going to let any more crap happen to me without fighting back. I had 10 days before the arbitration meeting. I immediately got to work. First, I obtained a signed deposition from the repairman who had examined the appliance, stating that it was in dire need of maintenance and that the last time he had done any work on it was almost 5 years ago. I thoroughly reviewed my rental contract and local laws, which revealed that SBL was obligated to have all appliances maintained and serviced every year. I also talked to some of the other tenants and learned that SBL had sued previous tenants after the fact. I tracked them down and obtained sworn statements from them as well. Unfortunately, most of them didn't know what to do and didn't show up for arbitration, resulting in SBL winning by default. I was determined not to let him do that to me. I drew up a rebuttal to each and every claim he made, including photos from the year plus that I had lived there. I printed out all my email correspondence and even convinced my ex-roommate and one of the movers who had heard my interaction with SBL about him praising my generosity to come with me. On the day of the arbitration, dressed in my power suit and with my ex-roommate and worker in tow, I showed up at the meeting. In Canada, arbitration is not held in a courtroom, but rather in a conference room at the courthouse with a judge. We had 1 hour with the judge. Since SBL was the plaintiff, he got to present his case first. He spent over 40 minutes going over everything while I sat quietly, patiently waiting for him to finish. Once he finished, I presented my multiple copies of the rebuttal to the judge, SBL, and anyone else who wanted one. I quickly went over each point. SBL was irate and interrupted me almost every second sentence. I paused every time he spoke and sweetly said, "I was quiet and polite during your time to present your case. I hope you grant me the same respect." SBL's face turned red, especially when I presented the deposition from the maintenance worker. I included the relevant sections of the Tenancy Landlord Act regarding appliance maintenance and stated that it was the only record of maintenance that had occurred. Unless he could produce more recent records from another company, it had been over 5 years since anything had been looked at. In my defense, I also requested my deposit back and a day's pay from work since I had to take the day off for the meeting. The judge then made his statement, and I will always remember it. He said he was very impressed with my presentation, and that it was evident I had a good handle on things. He could tell that my nature was one of kindness and respect, especially through the photos of how I had furnished and maintained the townhouse, taking pride in my home. Bottom line, not only did I win my case, but SBL also ended up owing me over 80% of my deposit back, including interest. The look on SBL's face was priceless. The judge then informed SBL that they would be reviewing all his previous filings, and if there was enough evidence of harassment, he would be reported to the Board of Landlords and Tenants. I'm not sure what came of that. Now, I walked away from that day feeling on top of the world, completely justified, and he got a taste of his own medicine, but it didn't stop there. Oh no. Knowing that this guy had a history of suing tenants, I printed out the final results, with the judge's signature, and gave a copy to every tenant in that complex. I wanted to warn everyone about his practices and advise them to keep notes, photos, etc., so he couldn't do the same to them, but I didn't stop there either. He still owed me money, and I repeatedly asked for payment, but he never responded. He had a deadline to pay me back my deposit, so on that day I went to his house. I found his residence in public records, as he had to file under a certain address as a landlord, and knocked on the door. He didn't answer, though I knew he was home. I rang the bell a few more times and knocked loudly. He then turned on his house alarm, which initially startled me but quickly turned into amusement when I realized what a coward this bully was. I yelled loudly that I wasn't going anywhere. He shouted, "Get off my property or I will call the police." No problem. I stepped off the property but camped out on the front sidewalk. I had a fold-up chair, a cooler with water and sodas, a few sandwiches, and all my paperwork with me. I was prepared to stay there indefinitely. I started telling anyone who passed by, some were already there from the house alarm incident, about how I was a tenant who had been wrongfully sued and now had a claim against him, and he owed me money. I let anyone interested look at the paperwork as evidence. The police showed up. They first went to talk to SBL, who claimed I was harassing him, slandering him, and refusing to leave his property. I was on public property, the sidewalk, and it isn't slander if it's true, which I could prove with all my court-signed paperwork. I wasn't disturbing the peace. I was simply seated outside his home, talking to neighbors about his actions. He was out there yelling that I needed to leave, but I calmly stated that I would be happy to leave once he paid me the amount he was legally obligated to by that date. I wasn't going to leave without money in my hand, and I was more than willing to stay and tell anyone who would listen why I was camped out there. The police informed me that I wasn't doing anything wrong, that it was public property, I wasn't disturbing the peace, and it wasn't slander if it was true. Finally, after an hour of SBL yelling on his front lawn at the police, and at me, of course, his wife came out with money. She handed it to the police, who then handed it to me and documented the final payment. I smiled sweetly, thanked the police profusely, and went home. I have no idea what happened to SBL or if he is still pulling the same crap on others, but I hope I helped instill some fear in him that he can't just screw with people, because eventually it will come back to bite him. Sometimes nice guys, or girls, finish last, but with patience, they can finish with a win. The next one is an entitled people story. I work at a gas station, and I have 2 customers who are disgustingly disrespectful when it comes to learning disabilities. One is an entitled old man whom I call Hank. He talks to me as if I am deaf, exaggerating his words. I usually roll my eyes because he genuinely believes I am stupid. The other customer is a woman I call Karen. She acts as if I am required to know every cigarette brand on the wall or memorize their prices, which I refuse to do. She talks down to me as if I am a small child, especially when there is a line of customers. She also uses the R word casually as if it's trendy. So on this particular day, both Karen and Hank were in the store. Luckily, my manager was there too. I was about to take my break when Karen demanded that I serve her and process a split payment of cash and credit for gas. Both my manager and I explained to her that our system doesn't accept split payments. However, she refused to believe it and insisted that we make an exception. I went on my break and was reading when Karen made a snide remark to my manager, saying, "I didn't know she knew how to read." My manager, without skipping a beat, responded, "Why would you think she was illiterate?" Karen just scoffed and loudly stated, "Well, we all know disabled people usually fake it. I bet she doesn't even know the name of the book." Memnoch the Devil by Anne Rice. This copy is from 1995 and it was bought by my mother. I can give you a summary, but it might bore you. I smiled and finished my break. She glared at me. "I don't play games." "Neither do I," I replied, returning to stocking cigarettes and other products. Hank eventually approached the register with his usual drink and an attitude of false pity. "I would like 4 Marlboro Red shorts in a box. Did you get that?" He spoke slowly and loudly. My manager looked at him and said, "You know she's not deaf." "Well, she is disabled and I was just trying to make it easier," Hank retorted. Finally, I turned around and looked at Hank. "It would be easier if you and Karen would stop acting as if the world is ending just because a person with a learning disability like me can work a real job. I shouldn't have to remind you to allow me to focus on my responsibilities so I can provide you with the customer service you need." Both of them stared at me, and my manager simply smiled and asked, "Are you happy now?" To sum it up, I have two ignorant individuals who can't seem to comprehend that people with learning disabilities can work jobs, even at a gas station. I am not deaf, nor am I invalid. I genuinely wish these two would stop acting as if their world has shattered just because I am here. The next one is an entitled parents story that happened to me yesterday. I'm on vacation at a touristy beach spot. I went out mid-morning to the beach before the crowds and set up my towel, umbrella, chair, cooler, etc. Around 11 a.m., while lying on my towel tanning with headphones in, I get a tap on my shoulder. I open my eyes to a middle-aged woman standing over me and her family and young kids starting to set up multiple umbrellas, chairs, and toys about 10 feet behind me. When I took my headphones out, the woman proceeds to tell me that my bathing suit is inappropriate to be around her children, and so I will need to move. Note: the bathing suit is a cheeky bikini bottom, but not a thong. I tell her I was there first, and they can find somewhere else to set up if it offends her. She proceeds to say there are no other close spots to the water. I tell her I'm not moving and put my headphones back in. About an hour later, I decide to hop in the water for a dip to cool off. While in the water, I look at the shoreline, and the woman has packed up my stuff with her husband and is carrying it away from the area. I hop out of the water and get a lifeguard to call beach security while I watch them walking my stuff up the beach to relocate it. Beach security and I approach them. They try to play dumb and say it's their stuff, so they are asked to open the wallet to show ID. Surprise, it's my ID. The cops are then called, and I choose to press charges for theft. And I got my spot back since the family was escorted, kicked off the beach. The next one is an entitled people story. I never imagined that my life would spiral into such chaos, with my own mother-in-law at the center of it all. This is the story of how my mother-in-law orchestrated a diabolical plan, leading to my arrest and nearly destroying my life. Buckle up, because this roller coaster ride isn't for the faint of heart. It all began with the passing of my beloved uncle, who bequeathed his house to me. At the time, little did I know that my conniving mother-in-law was scheming behind my back, forging documents to claim ownership of the property. Unbeknownst to me, she harbored a deep resentment towards me even before I married her daughter. She had hoped for my wife to marry a wealthy suitor, not a man like me. In a cruel twist of fate, my wife had been involved in a severe car accident and slipped into a coma due to brain trauma. As a result, my mother-in-law and I were forced to spend considerable time together, as we both cared for my wife during her incapacitated state. Our strained relationship grew even more toxic, but I tried my best to endure it for my wife's sake. Little did I know that my life was about to unravel in the most unimaginable way. One fateful day, my world came crashing down when the police stormed into my house, brandishing guns and accusing me of possessing an illegal firearm. I was dumbfounded. I had never owned a gun in my life. Despite my protests, they ignored my words and charged me with possession of an illegal firearm, trespassing, and theft of the house. In the eyes of the law, I was nothing more than a criminal, as my mother-in-law had cunningly manipulated the situation to her advantage. With my wife still in a coma, I had no one to advocate for me. Fear gripped me as I contemplated the prospect of spending years in prison for crimes I hadn't committed. Fortunately, the authorities decided not to detain me pending the resolution of the case. They released me, allowing me to seek legal representation and prepare for the impending court battle. However, I couldn't return to my home, which my mother-in-law had shamelessly occupied, tossing my belongings out like discarded rubbish. The rage and despair within me surged, but I was determined to prove my innocence and expose my mother-in-law's treachery. Although I was not a wealthy or highly educated man, I possessed a sharp mind. I knew I had to find evidence to support my claims and clear my name. I focused on two crucial aspects: disproving my mother-in-law's alleged travel to a neighboring country and obtaining fingerprints from the weapon she had planted. These pieces of evidence would be pivotal in unmasking her deceit. Fate smiled upon me when a benevolent favor from one of my uncle's friends, a lawyer, offered his expertise pro bono. Together, we launched a full investigation, scrutinizing my mother-in-law's travel history and collecting fingerprint samples from the weapon. It was a race against time to unearth the truth and secure my freedom before it was too late. Eventually, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The police discovered that my mother-in-law had indeed recently traveled to the neighboring country where firearms were readily available. Furthermore, the fingerprints retrieved from the gun conclusively implicated her, not me. The tide had turned, and the authorities finally started to believe my side of the story. Unable to provide legitimate documentation to prove her ownership, my mother-in-law's web of deceit unraveled further. They delved into the history of the house's previous owner, my uncle, finding no connection whatsoever to my mother-in-law. It became abundantly clear that she had fabricated everything to steal my inheritance and frame me for her crimes. The tables had turned on my wicked mother-in-law. The police dropped all charges against me and redirected their focus onto her. In addition to the illegal possession of a firearm, she faced severe consequences for forging official documents, an offense that carried a significant jail sentence. Finally, justice would be served. I filed a lawsuit against my mother-in-law to reclaim the lost possessions and bring her to financial accountability. Unable to afford a competent lawyer, she stood defenseless in court, with her actions haunting her as she faced the consequences of her malicious intent. It was a bittersweet victory knowing that justice was served, but the damage had already been done. After months of tumult and instability, I could finally return to my rightful home. The feeling of relief washed over me as I stepped through the door, knowing that I had reclaimed what was rightfully mine. However, the scars left by this harrowing experience would forever remain. The next one is a pro-revenge story. This happened around 20 years ago. Our family owned 2 apartment buildings, each with 3 units. We lived in 2 of them and rented out the other 4. There were nothing but these 3 flats lining both sides of the road for about a mile. Not all of them had parking. On the side streets, there were houses and very little street parking. We had more land than most of these units because it was also our home, so we had parking for around 16 cars. Everything was fine for literally decades. Then cars started appearing in our parking lot that were not from our tenants. One day I blocked one in. When I went outside, I saw that this a-hole had driven through our bushes and across the yard to get out. I called the cops, but there was nothing they could do. So I called a tow company and had them put up signs. We would have to call them to have a car towed. The signs seemed to work. No more random cars. Until New Year's Eve one year. I arrived home, and every space was filled. There were even cars on the street, blocking in the other cars. I was beyond pissed. I called the tow company, but they couldn't do anything for a few hours because they were so busy. We're in the Chicago suburbs, and it's below zero out. I had an idea. I dug out the lawn sprinklers and hoses. I ran one hose inside to the laundry room faucet and turned on the hot water. This way the hose and sprinklers wouldn't ice up. But the cars and the ground sure did. I used 3 sprinklers, moving them every half hour or so for almost 5 hours. Every car and every square inch of the parking lot, as well as the street by the cars, was encased in ice. I made it a point to spray ice into the locks, between the window seals and glass, and in the grills. Then I put away the sprinklers and hoses and went to bed. At 4 a.m. there was furious pounding on the doors and nonstop ringing of doorbells. We just smiled and called the cops. We waited until they arrived and went outside. The cops were holding back laughter. These people were told to park here by their friend who owned an apartment several buildings away. It was the same idiot who drove over our bushes. I pointed to the tow sign and told the people to move their cars or get towed. In our town, cops can ticket on private property with the owner's permission, so all the cars were ticketed. They were also towed since nobody could get into their vehicles. I wish we had it on video. The next one is a petty revenge story. I have dwarfism, and this often leads to weird interactions in public, especially with kids. Sometimes a kid comes up to me to ask why I'm so short, and I have a pre-prepared response for that, but most of the time they just loudly ask their parents why I'm so short. Usually the parents will awkwardly drag their kids away, telling them not to comment on people in public, which is sad but understandable. I like the parents who just say something about how some people are born like this, and even though we look a bit different, we're still regular people just like everyone else. Sometimes I hear a gem like, "I bet he shrank in the wash." What I can't stand is when people try to use me to parent their kids. I'm sure you can think of ways to convince your kids to finish their plate at dinner that don't involve pointing at a dwarf in public and saying that's what happens when you leave food on your plate, or he didn't listen to his mommy when she told him to eat all his vegetables. It's rude, it's humiliating, and it teaches your kid that differences are a bad thing and that people are at fault for their differences or disabilities. It just pisses me off. A few days ago, I was in public, and a kid who was maybe 4 or 5 years old was acting out, and his mom was clearly struggling to keep him under control. So she pointed to me and told her son that I was one of Santa's elves, and I was watching him and would tell Santa about his behavior. The kid's name was on a keyring on his backpack, so I just said, "It's okay, Hunter. You're already on the nice list, and Santa told me you're getting an iPad this Christmas." Hunter was excited. His mom was not. The next one is a malicious compliance story. So this happened a couple of years ago when I was 19 or 20, somewhere around then. As a wee lad, I got a job working at a local superstore while attending college. I was a cashier. It sucked. But honestly, it wasn't as bad as it could have been. My immediate manager helped protect the cashiers from the higher-ups. But those are war stories for another day. As time went on, as it does, eventually the dreaded holiday season came around. Thanksgiving week to be exact. I got the week off of school due to the holidays and was scheduled to work a juicy 40 hours that week. But unfortunately, I was scheduled to work on Thanksgiving and Black Friday. My schedule had Thursdays off, but Thanksgiving falls on a Thursday, and I was being forced to work. The good news is, at least they fed us a ton of food in the break room. That was honestly nice. But I was bummed that I had to miss the holiday with family since I had prepared to have the day off as I thought I would. Now, before we get into the main story, a quick note. The store did not allow overtime, OT. You were given extra lunches, sent home early, whatever they had to do to avoid paying out. If you got OT, you were either lucky or you had a major problem you were being made to handle. Management was salaried, and the enlisted workers were lucky to get 38-plus hours. No extra money for the folks in the trenches. As we are a major store that caters to everything from groceries to electronics, we prepared for a very long week that tends to mark the hustle and bustle of the holiday season as a whole. The energy is pretty low as we all really dread this time of year, and I am extra nervous. This is my first retail job on the front lines during the holidays, and I heard all the horror stories about what is coming. The store manager, SM, gathers up a lot of the workers for a quick announcement that Monday. He tells us that essentially we are really behind and have a ton of work to do, and this is going to be a rough and wild week. So he is authorizing any and all OT across all departments from today until Sunday. He told the managers and department heads that if an employee wanted to work, let them work. We need the coverage. Later on, we would discover what he meant was letting us come in on our days off to work an extra shift or two, tacking on a nice 8 hours to our paychecks. Whoops. If an employee wants to work a shift, let them work. And oh boy, oh lord, oh gosh, oh golly gee whiz, did we want to work? Let me tell you, we went crazy. I pulled 6 doubles that week. Someone parked their RV in the parking lot and worked what had to most likely be forbidden due to labor laws. People were working maximum hours. One day I worked so long our manager gave me 3 lunch breaks. Dozens of people jumped at this opportunity. The next day I came in and saw the overnight guys still puttering around. We milked that week for every hour, every cent of possible overtime. I don't recall all the numbers and such directly, but I think I went from a 72-hour paycheck to one that had about 118, and around 42 was OT, which was 1.5x paid. It's been a few years, but those numbers feel right. Also, if you work on Thanksgiving, you are given a single-use 25% off coupon to use in the store on one big order. Since I use my overtime on stuff to buy in the store, it felt like I earned an extra 25% on top of that. Management let it happen. No one said anything to the SM that week, and he sat in his office. It was 2 days after that week that some corporate suits showed up and gave him a verbal beating when they realized he blatantly authorized that. I think early on he realized his mistake, but the die was cast, and truth be told, we did need to get the work done. All that OT and we barely were ready for the open door on Black Friday. He was mad, shouted at a couple of managers after he got yelled at asking why they let us work so much, but they just shrugged. If an employee wants to work a shift, let them. It was immediately dropped, and it was clear it would never be allowed again, and policy would remain as it was. I bought a TV, a month or more of groceries, Christmas gifts for everyone, a new car battery, 2 new tires, and some random things here and there for myself. It was worth it. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. The next one is an entitled people story. Having a family that knows about your Reddit account has its disadvantages. Yesterday, my sister called me after I got off work to ask if comments were still coming in. She said she couldn't bear the negativity of looking at them herself because the comments were all so hurtful towards her, so I was brutally honest. At least 10 comments are still coming in daily, and most of them more or less say the same things about her. She started crying and demanded I delete my Reddit posts, but I refused and told her she can cry to anyone she wants. But the posts stay up because they are my assurance that she won't try to treat me like crap anymore. After all, she literally felt like my life should revolve around hers, didn't pay me the babysitting money she was supposed to, pocketed it for herself, and forced me to be the constant babysitter on last year's family vacation, so I had pretty much no fun the entire time. Is it really any wonder people have so much hate for her when she treated me like that? Then when I mentioned the posts have already spread to other websites because I was asked a couple of times to let an article be made about my situation, and there are some videos that were read as well. My sister shrieked hearing that and hung up. My parents then called me begging me to take the posts down. I've refused and stated that I only did this because they didn't stick up for me. This would have never happened if they'd told my sister to treat me like an equal and not a servant. I'm not her butler, babysitter, or handyman. I'm her freaking brother and a grown-ass man. Wouldn't they be tired of this crap in my shoes too? They agreed, but still begged me to take the post down. I refused and said that I'll keep making more if they don't start sticking up for me more when my sister comes crying to them. Let her clean up her own messes, because all the enabling of her led to this. I didn't father those kids. I've got a life of my own, a career I'm still new to, and hopefully soon enough a girlfriend as there's someone I want to ask out. I'm moving my life forward, and I won't be held back. They can either step out of my way or keep trying to enable my sister. But I assured them that the latter would end badly for them. The only way this posting on Reddit will stop is if the drama stops. I've kept things anonymous, and I have a right to vent my very valid frustrations. Well, that left my mother crying. My father just went silent, and I said tears don't move me. They know what it'll take to end this, and that's to stop enabling my sister. Well, my sister called me again to yell at me that our parents have told her they aren't dealing with this anymore and to figure it out herself. Oh, and they told her to be nicer to me too. I just pictured her eye twitching as she internally screamed after hearing that. Be nice to my kid brother, what is this? Do I look it up on Google? Yeah, I was that sarcastic to her, but it left her crying too when I hung up. My brother-in-law called me later to get my side of the story. He was mad I'm still posting and made his wife cry, but I explained everything to him and he said he'd have another talk with my sister. I'm hoping this drama finally ends here. But the family vacation is still on for late June. I've already booked my room and put in for a day off work so we can all leave on a Friday. My room is also not near the ones my parents, sister, brother-in-law, and nephews will be using. In fact, it's not even on the same floor. And when we go to the coast, when it's not a family activity, I'm going to go where I want and do what I want. And you can bet I'm going to tour those art galleries, pig out on local food, and just enjoy being carefree for a change. The next one is an entitled parent story. A little context. I work at a water park roughly 30 minutes away from my house, and I got my job from being friends with the director and having another friend in the business, but don't think for a second that I don't work. I'm the second hardest working person there, and I've received the Employee of the Month twice in the single year I've worked there, so I knew people there and people liked me. I don't particularly like kids, but I can handle them well enough. The water park also has two sections, the kids' side and the adult side. This story takes place on the kids' side of the park. All of my fellow employees hate working on the play structure. It has a slide and kids are annoying, so I decided to take it for the day, take one for the team, you know. So I was up in the play structure, and my job was to send kids down the slide when it was safe for them to go. This little girl comes up to the top and wants to go down. I wait a second until I see the other kids start to get out, then turn to tell the girl she can go, but she's already halfway down the slide. She nearly hits the kid because he was slow to get out. She comes back up and I kneel down and say, "Hey, that was dangerous. You could have hit that kid and both gotten hurt. Please wait for me to tell you when it's safe to go down the slide." She nodded and actually followed my instructions. But this is when she broke the rules again. At the entrance to the play structure, there's a sign that gives the rules. Wait for the worker to let you go down before going down the slide, and you aren't allowed to go face first. She decided to ignore Rule 2 and went down face first. She came back up again, so I knelt down again and said, "Hey, you can't go down head first. You could hurt yourself." She nodded and then went down head first again, anyway. The play structure works on a 3-strike system, so as that was her third time breaking the rules, I had to kick her off the slide. So when she came back up and started to walk towards the slide, I stepped in her way and said, "I'm sorry, you broke the rules 3 times, so you can't go down anymore." She yelled at me and tried to push her way past, but I'm bigger and stronger than her, so she couldn't get through and went back down the stairs in a huff. A solid 10 minutes passed, then she comes back up holding her mother's hand. Her mom says, relatively calmly at first, "My daughter told me you told her she couldn't go down the slide anymore. Is that true?" I said, "That is correct, ma'am." She asked me why, so I explained that if a person breaks the rules 3 times, they can't go down the slide. She gets closer to me and says, "Okay, I understand that, but she's 4 years old." I respond with, "Ma'am, it doesn't matter how old she is. She still broke the rules 3 times, so she can't go down the slide anymore today." She gets even closer and says, "Okay, but she's 4. I respond with, "I understand, but the rules apply to big kids the same as they do for the small kids, so she can't go down anymore today." Now, I'm 19, close to 20, relatively tall, not super muscular, white, and gay. A lot of people tend to notice that last one since I don't try to hide it. You can usually tell based on my mannerisms and the way I talk. Another thing I deal with, severe anger issues. And based on trauma from my childhood, people being in close proximity to my face makes me incredibly uncomfortable. This lady was maybe an inch away from my face when she started yelling at me and calling me a fucking FG. I was so close to losing my cool, I could actually feel my face turning beet red. My hands were balled into fists, and my jaw was incredibly tense. A bit more about me. I might look like a scrawny white kid, but when I get angry, I look like a demon, not my words. I wasn't even doing anything, and I was terrifying her daughter. In an attempt to keep my cool and to get this wail out of my face, I said, "Ma'am, please don't call me slurs. It's uncalled for and rude. I'm only doing my job." To my surprise, she actually got out of my face, scoffed, and said, "Let's go find someone in charge." Apparently, she had a day pass because I saw her later that evening talking to my manager. She looked over and saw me cleaning, and I just heard, "That's him!" My manager, Herm, who hates me by the way, comes over to me and asks me if I assaulted this woman's daughter. I, of course, said I didn't. But because he's a rampant asshole, he went to look at the cameras anyway. He saw that I was right in what I did and that I did everything according to procedure. We then went over to talk to the lady. She said, "Well, is he in trouble or not?" Herm looks at her and says, "He never did anything wrong, and he never assaulted your daughter. Then he gets this strange look and asks for her day pass. At first, she refuses to give it to him, then relents and gives Herm her pass. Turns out she wasn't even supposed to be there. Her pass had expired the day before, but she just didn't leave the hotel. So I had the privilege of escorting her to her room, waiting outside while they packed, and then escorting them out of the building. She was cussing me out the whole way out of the park, in front of her 4-year-old daughter, no less. Mom of the year, everyone. As we got out to her car, right as she got in, I said, "Thanks for coming to Name of the Park. Feel free to never come again," with the biggest grin on my face because that was my first Karen. At least it ended well. When I got inside, my manager told me I handled the situation very well, and I had a pretty uneventful end of the night. So please remember not to be rude to the workers because we're often right. The next one is an entitled people story. I've always believed in the power of hard work and responsible financial decisions. After years of dedication and saving, I finally achieved my dream of retiring comfortably with a beautiful house and a backyard pool. Meanwhile, my neighbor seemed to have a completely different mindset. He was younger than me, but had a reckless desire to get rich quickly and squander his money. Though I didn't particularly like him, I couldn't ignore the fact that he frequently shared his questionable activities with me. One day, he even offered to help me evade taxes by using his dubious methods. I promptly declined, opting for the straightforward approach of paying my taxes and leading an honest life. He also made several not-so-subtle attempts to sell me drugs, which was quite baffling to me. Weren't drug dealers supposed to keep a low profile? Despite his flaws, I didn't consider him to be an inherently bad person, just someone misguided in his pursuit of wealth. However, there was one thing that irked me about him: his evident jealousy over my pool. On numerous occasions, I caught him trying to sneak into my yard wearing swimming trunks, attempting to enjoy my pool without permission. Firmly and resolutely, I would chase him away, and he never put up a fight. While he did ask if he could host a party at my pool, I always denied his request. Surprisingly, he never persisted, so I couldn't quite decipher his character apart from his desire to acquire riches without putting in the hard work. One weekend, I embarked on a trip to visit my son, who had recently become a father. I didn't worry much about my property since I lived in a decent neighborhood and had installed security cameras. My son had even helped me set up an app on my phone to monitor any unusual activities remotely. During the final night of my trip, my phone alerted me of motion detected in the backyard. Assuming it was a raccoon, I didn't think much of it. Little did I know what awaited me upon my return. When I arrived the next day, I found my once pristine pool area in utter disarray. Empty beer bottles and drugs littered the ground, and the water had an unusual color, indicating alcohol had been carelessly spilled. Cups, plates, and even items of clothing were strewn all around. I promptly filed a police report and provided them with the footage of the party that I had captured on my phone. It was the final straw with my neighbor, and I decided to press charges against him for trespassing and property destruction. As expected, he was obligated to pay for the damages, but with the extent of the destruction, I doubted he would have much left. Moreover, the presence of drugs in the video prompted the police to obtain a warrant and search his house, leading to the discovery of a significant quantity of narcotics. Consequently, he faced charges related to drug possession and intent to distribute. While the trespassing charge might have seemed trivial in comparison, I couldn't let it slide. It was time for me to take matters into my own hands. I contacted the IRS, informing them about my neighbor's boastful claims of evading taxes in his business. I urged them to investigate further, which they promptly did. Unveiling his deceitful tactics, they discovered that he had been fraudulently writing off his business taxes by disguising them as large donations to a charity. However, upon investigation, they realized that the charity was merely a front, redirecting funds back into his personal account to evade taxes. It was a poorly constructed scheme, and the IRS saw through it immediately. Consequently, his business was shut down, and any prospects of starting a new venture were extinguished. I wasn't privy to the exact duration, but due to the multitude of charges against him, he was sentenced to spend a considerable amount of time behind bars. The guy who aspired to get rich without working and who had invaded my pool was now penniless and confined within prison walls. I don't wish ill upon anyone, but it was a poignant lesson about the consequences of pursuing wealth through illegal means. The next one is a pro-revenge story. So I live in a quiet little town in the Midwestern United States. My house is the last house at the end of a sleepy little dead-end road. A new guy moves in next door, let's call him Dick. Dick was probably one of those guys who was so popular in high school that he thought he had it made without doing any work and tried to spend the rest of his life living off being the cool guy. He's the type of guy who drives a lifted truck and a motorcycle. Don't get me wrong, I ride motorcycles myself. What I don't do is sit in my driveway at 2 a.m. and rev my engine. There's a bit of a downhill slope from the middle of the street to our houses at the end, and Dick likes to race down this hill, then lock his brakes and drift into his driveway. The first winter after he moved in, I noticed that my mailbox had been crushed, and there were fresh tire tracks in the snow leading down the street, over my mailbox, and into his driveway. A few days later, I saw Dick standing outside and asked about this. He denied the entire thing, saying he didn't know what happened to my mailbox and that it must have been a delivery guy or something. I figured whatever, and fixed my mailbox. A few months later, the same thing happened again. I fixed my mailbox and moved on. Sometime later, this happened yet again. This time I was pretty pissed, so I talked to my cousin, who's a commercial welder, and had him make me a mailbox out of some scrap quarter-inch steel plate, which was mounted on a length of old railroad track for its post. A little bit of glue and some cedar shingles, and you'd never know it wasn't a typical wooden mailbox. Also, the railroad track post was sunk in concrete 4 feet into the ground. For the next several weeks, I waited with anticipation every time I heard his truck roaring down the street, but nothing. Until about 5 months later when I heard his truck, then a crash. By this time, I had forgotten about my mailbox and thought for sure he'd struck another car. I ran out to the street to see if anyone needed help, and there was his truck broadside against my mailbox, all smashed up. He saw me walk up and started yelling about how I had destroyed his truck and he'd make me pay, and he called the cops. A cop showed up to take his report, and Dick pointed out how my mailbox had been specifically designed to destroy his truck. I gotta admit, I got nervous at this point. The cop looked around at the truck and the construction of the mailbox, then turned back to us and asked me if I'd had trouble with my mailbox before. I explained how it had been smashed several times in the past year. The cop then said, "It's pretty clear what happened here. This is an obvious case of wanton destruction of property." My heart sank to the ground, and Dick got a smug look on his face. But then the cop turns to Dick and says, "I'm going to issue a citation for this, as well as reckless driving." You should have seen Dick's face at this point. He was boiling with rage as the cop wrote him 2 tickets and told him he needed to pay for the repair of the damaged wood on my mailbox. The metal was fine, hadn't even tilted it, but the wood camouflage had broken off. The next one is a petty revenge story. This actually happened many years ago now, but I was dining at a restaurant with friends around 9-ish in the evening. Not a fancy restaurant by any means, but an affordable, delicious option that's always open late. It wasn't busy, and there was one very bored waitress who looked to be in her 40s. She put on a perky face and took our orders. Being a picky eater, I asked for a burger with no lettuce or tomato. I'd ordered the exact thing dozens of times before with no real issues, but something was off about this waitress. "It comes with the lettuce and tomato, honey," she said like I was stupid. "Yeah," I laughed, thinking she was just teasing me at first. "I just want the cheese, though." "It just comes like that. That's how we make it, with lettuce and tomato," she said matter-of-factly. I looked at my friends for some sort of help and only received dumbfounded looks in return. I said as nicely as I could. "Would you just leave the lettuce and tomato off?" I was waiting for her to understand, but she acted like I was speaking nonsense. "Sorry, but that's just how we make it," she replied, clearly annoyed now. "But if you don't like it, just pick it off, sweetie." She finished taking our orders while I sat there, stunned. Picking off lettuce and tomato is easy enough, sure, but on rare occasions when the restaurant had forgotten to leave it off for me in the past, it usually left the bun soggy and tasting of the toppings I disliked. Hence why I asked for it not to be assembled that way. And I did everything I could, in my very confused state of mind, to be polite to this woman, especially because I started to wonder if she was 1, on drugs, 2, messing with me to win a bet, or 3, profoundly stupid. I did end up receiving a burger with lettuce and tomato, surprise, surprise, and the bun was soaked by the questionable-looking piled-on tomatoes. It even looked like they had managed to add more toppings than usual, and I wondered what I ever could have done to this strange waitress to make her mess with my hunger like that. Did I hurt her in a past life? I asked if I could at least get a fresh burger bun because it was so watery, and she just looked at me, exasperated, and said, "This again? Just pick it off. It's fine." I never made a scene, I never asked to speak to a manager, and I ate my fries and the parts of the burger I liked. I honestly don't really like confrontation, but I did get a bit of petty revenge in the end. On the table, I left her the oldest, dirtiest $1 bill from my friend's wallet as a tip, because you should always tip your servers. But I put the lettuce and tomato on top of that nasty dollar bill with a note saying, "Just pick it off, sweetie." I wish I could have seen her face. The next one is a malicious compliance story. So this happened a few years ago. I was a union delegate at a large firm. We had a manager called Karen. I've written about her before on this subreddit, who was appointed to her role by a director of the company. Let's call the director her uncle. Karen wasn't very clever. She hadn't finished high school and previously worked as a receptionist. She once told me 40 was half of 100. Karen is struggling in her job and basically does nothing. Her desk is a mess of paperwork. She also looks after all the small departments like records, security, stores, etc. If anyone takes on Karen, the director steps in and Karen gets a get-out-of-jail card. There were a few occasions when Karen got yelled at by a manager for making costly mistakes, and Karen was put on stress leave, and the manager got a warning. One of the paralegals, Sally, from Records, comes to me to say she thinks she's in trouble. Sally recently had 6 weeks leave. She was forced on leave due to having too much annual leave. Once you have more than 6 weeks, you are forced to go on leave until you have no more than 2 weeks. Sally tells me that HR and Karen enforced her on leave, and she submitted a paper leave form the same day Karen was put on stress leave. Sally went on leave, came back the same day as Karen. Sally's leave wasn't docked, she just got paid as per regular. While Karen was away, they replaced her with Paula, who found Karen hadn't really done any work for 7 months. I found Paula and casually asked about what happened. She told me that on day 1, she threw all the paperwork out and started over again. So I attended a meeting with Sally, Karen, and HR, knowing there isn't a record of Sally's leave. Karen starts the meeting on a verbal rampage about Sally not doing as she told her to do. Sally needs to go on leave now or else, and she doesn't want to hear excuses. I interject at this point and point out to HR that Karen's behavior is unacceptable, but we agree, QMC, that since Sally has over 8 weeks leave now, she will go on leave effective tomorrow. Sally submits a leave form to Karen, and we leave the meeting. Sally's leave is reduced on her payslip this time. No one questioned a thing. The next one is an entitled people story. I need to get this off my chest. As some of you may know, I'm a capybara farmer, and recently, due to the viral trend around these amazing creatures, my peaceful capybara farm has turned into a hotspot for self-entitled content creators looking for their next big viral video. They've trespassed, they've stolen, they've subjected my capybaras to stressful, inappropriate behaviors. I am deeply disturbed by their lack of respect and total disregard for the well-being of my animals, not to mention the breach of my privacy and property rights. But things escalated beyond belief. Just last week, one of these trespassers, a man looking for some adrenaline-filled footage, decided it would be a great idea to wrestle a capybara. Not only is this incredibly distressing for the animal, it's also dangerous. And surprise, surprise, the man ended up seriously injuring or losing part of his genitals. This man, the one who trespassed and harassed my animals, is suing me. Apparently, he thinks I'm responsible for damage to his reproductive organs that occurred while he was illegally on my property and distressing my animals. A few days ago, I woke up to find my capybaras all huddled together in one corner of the farm, clearly terrified. Upon investigating, I found a person dressed in a homemade capybara costume, trying to live among them for a 24 hours living as a capybara challenge. It's clear there was some sort of sexual element. Not only had they trespassed onto my property in the dead of night, but they were also equipped with various props and toys they thought capybaras played with, a beach ball and a squeaky toy, among other less tasteful things. They were actively trying to coerce my capybaras into engaging with these objects' toys for their video, causing immense stress to the animals. When I confronted them, their response was shocking. They argued that they were doing the capybaras a favor by making them famous. They truly saw nothing wrong with their actions. I had to call the authorities to have them removed from my property. The disrespect for private property, the welfare of animals, and basic human decency has been simply mind-boggling. The next one is an entitled parents story. I argued with my husband about whether or not to post this because I'm pretty sure this will make the local news, and I didn't want to burn this account just yet. But he won RPS, so here we are. Prepare yourself. This story has layers. We were at the dreaded big box store picking up potting soil because we're going to DIY ourselves through the isolation. Things aren't crazy here, yet, but there is a 2 per customer limit on a majority of items. I assume this means everything, so we're getting 2 bags each of a few different types of soil. My husband is loading the last of 8 bags on our cart when I hear her. I know it's a Karen just by the level of unnecessary outrage in her voice. Karen, are you kidding me? Not a lot of people out here in the garden center, but we all look to her. I was almost disappointed to see she didn't come with the requisite haircut. She actually looked like a frazzled mom, her kid tugging on her hand and an overfull handbasket of groceries. And I had a moment of, girl, I feel you. But damn it, she was pointing at us. Karen, you can't buy that many. You are hoarding, my husband. Yeah, we can. We're getting 2 each. Karen, oh, you don't fool me. I know what you're doing. My husband, so do I. Duck off. I'm just sitting there imagining all the ways I'm going to rock his world tonight. Well, Karen huffed at that, spun around, and yanked her kid back inside to go complain to the employee working the register nearby. Now we already paid for our items. The employee had come out and scanned the bags earlier, and he could easily see our cart from inside. So, being finished, we pushed the cart out of the garden center into the parking lot. And then the automatic doors open behind us, and I hear, now they're stealing. Juice, great. We load the soil in the car and turn around to bring the cart back and look at plants. By the time we get back, Karen has given up on trying to convince the employee we're the Bonnie and Clyde of dirt and is now trying to negotiate skipping somebody in line. She has a child, you see, in her handbasket. Well, it's just so full and heavy. Could she please just scooch right on in here real quick and it'll just be an extra second, she swears. The woman Karen is trying to skip is young, maybe college age, and wearing a face mask. Not a medical mask, but the stretchy kind you'd wear while riding a motorcycle or when you're skiing. My husband has just informed me it's a neck gaiter. The mask is black and has scary wolf teeth on it that honestly made the girl look like somebody you should not mess with, even though she was wearing a Gap t-shirt and flip-flops. Mask girl is just shaking her head no, and that's all I got as we dropped off the cart. I browse, pick up a couple plants, and we head inside to wait in line. Now it's showtime. Karen and Mask Girl are near the register facing off, no pun intended. From the looks of things, Mask Girl finished her purchase, and Karen stopped her before she could leave. I don't know if she grabbed her or anything, but Karen was still holding her full handbasket, so she hadn't checked out yet. Well, she hadn't paid for her groceries yet, because clearly this woman had checked out. Karen, but you don't even need it now, you're leaving. My son could get sick because you won't give it to him, and he needs it. Mask Girl, hell no, you can't have it. Back off, lady. Karen, but my son really likes it, and it's obviously made for boys anyway. Why would you even want to wear something so scary? Mask Girl, because I like it, and it has my germs on it. Why would you put a stranger's mask on your kid? Karen, oh, why are you being so rude? You wouldn't let us go through the checkout first, and now you're making my son very upset. Mask Girl, your problem, not mine. And then Mask Girl turns to leave while Karen manifests the biggest balls ever and grabs Mask Girl by the back of her mask. Let me make a side note here. When all of this is going down, we're all just standing in line and watching. The register is still going boop, boop, boop as the employee scans items, but otherwise, we are all just inside this hypnotic bubble. But when Karen reached out towards Mask Girl, it was like the bubble popped and made everything crystal clear. Not slow-mo or anything, but I absolutely felt hyper-aware. Like Spider-Man. Karen reaches out. People on both sides of me inhale loudly. Karen grabs the mask and yanks. A lady on my right yells, and my husband steps forward, so getting laid tonight. Mask Girl tucks her head down and she turns to Karen like a pissed-off bull with a bright and shiny new target. I think Karen was going to say something like, "Don't walk away from me" or something, but all she got out was, "Don't crack." I looked around because the noise was so loud I figured the roof was about to cave in, but out of the corner of my eye I see Karen spasm and drop to the floor writhing. Little Miss Mask Girl had a ducking taser. I don't know when she pulled it out, this tiny little flashlight-looking thing, but she laid Karen out with it, and not one of us moved for what felt like forever, like we were frozen. And then it was ducking bedlam. A security guard shows up, more employees show up, Mask Girl is chilling like she's been through this before and knows what comes next. The kid is screaming that the wolf girl killed his mom, even though she's groaning and sobbing on the floor and clearly not dead, but maybe wishing she was. The people that had been in line with us were all talking at once, trying to tell the security guard what happened. We hung around just witnessing the insanity for maybe 2 minutes before Karen started choking out demands for an ambulance, the police, a lawyer, the mayor, restitution, and reparations. My husband made eye contact with an employee and got a thumbs up when he put the plants on a shelf and pointed towards the door. We got the duck out of there. We drove home in silence until my husband parked the car in our driveway, and then we just burst out laughing. Neither of us has ever seen anything like that before. We live in a small beach town. People are super laid back and mellow. Karen was anything but, and I hope to never see her again. The next one is an entitled parents story. I was traveling on my city metro. It wasn't very crowded at that time, but all the seats were occupied. Nonetheless, you could freely stand without being bumped by a stranger. There was this kid sitting in the reserved seats, the ones for people with disabilities, pregnant women, and the elderly. Definitely not for moms of 2-year-olds. He was probably 14 or 15, I don't know. He is the hero of the story here. Then at one stop, our entitled mom comes in. She has this cute little child who was trying to keep up with his mom's pace. Entitled mom instantly notices our hero sitting in the reserved seat and just stares at him. I guess this was her way of making people automatically give up their seats or something. The kid didn't move, though. This probably irked entitled mom a lot, I guess, because she moved towards the kid with heavy steps. She comes near him, stops, and again stares. The kid doesn't budge. Then she starts screaming. If she didn't have the whole compartment's attention earlier, she had it now. She starts berating the kid for sitting in a reserved seat and not giving it to someone more deserving like a mother herself with a young kid. I don't know what her logic was. The seats aren't reserved for them anyway. She just keeps shouting and screaming and tries to get others' opinions on it. And for a while, people were on her side. Then the kid, out of nowhere, rolls up the right side of his jeans and detaches the artificial leg, placing it in front of entitled mom. The look on her face was priceless. It looked like she was mortified and embarrassed at the same time. She just backed away silently and got off at the next stop. I don't think that was her stop. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.